This is Guideposts with Dr. Tim Stauffer, a podcast where Tim and his friends engage in purposeful conversation about identity, parenting, culture, faith, and more. Tim Stauffer is a professor of counseling and a licensed clinical counselor. My name is Sam Meyung, and I'm Tim's friend. My life has been greatly enriched by my time talking to Tim and getting his thoughts on many matters that impact my life daily. After listening to this podcast, I hope you'll feel the same. Guideposts are discernment markers. They provide opportunities for direction as well as warnings of pitfalls. Go this way and be careful of that way. We hope that each episode provides some sense of direction as we navigate the challenges of daily life. Thanks so much for listening. A quick disclaimer, the content of this podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your licensed mental health provider. Tim, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Sam. Looking forward to our conversation today. What's on our minds? Like, what is?
Yes.
Set up our conversation for us.
Yep. So today we're going to discuss the topic of resiliency. You sent me a TED Talk video on YouTube that was pretty great, and so I want to discuss that for a little bit. And so it was on resiliency. It was by this woman, Dr. Lucy Hone. She's a co-director of New Zealand Well-Being and Resilience. She's spent a lot of time doing resilience research, has her PhD. She's also an author. Spent some significant time working with U.S. military training soldiers, and I think even actually with doing work with soldiers post actually experiencing war and stuff like that.
Right.
Working with mental fitness. So incredibly accomplished in her field and what she does, but as she shares in her TED Talk, also has some very real life experience herself, losing a teenage daughter in a car accident. So much of her TED Talk was her talking about, what was just study and research, and her work became very personal and very real to her, right, with the loss of her daughter. And so she talks about this idea of resiliency and being resilient. So I thought that would be a great conversation for us to talk about today.
Yeah, when I listened to her story, I think, man, it's good to be accomplished. It's good to have good, solid research and knowledge on our side, and to be able to parse out the particularities of something academically, and there's some real value in that. But listening to her story was inspiring and crushing all at the same time. Yeah. It's like we come to terms with this reality that life dishes out complex and difficult circumstances that we don't have any control of.
Yep.
And we need a place of resiliency. And I think like economically, we need to be resilient, politically, socially, environmentally. Like our nature serves up all sorts of trauma and all sorts of catastrophe that we just have to deal with. Like it's like nobody did anything wrong, and yet here we are, shattered by the circumstances of life. And what does it mean? And why is it that some people get back up on their feet and regain a sense of self and can thrive again, and other people don't? And we find those answers in resiliency studies. Yeah,
I've heard another word that I feel like is a very similar word that a friend of mine has used, and also asked the question, like, where is the grit in people anymore? Mm-hmm. And it was actually him really more asking the question towards myself and a younger generation as well. Him reflecting on, I just don't see as many people with this willingness to persevere and to fight through hard situations. And and so maybe before maybe quick before we discuss the 3 points that Dr. Hone lists in her talk, maybe it would be helpful to talk about, like, why is cultivating resiliency so important? Like, should that be a good and necessary thing we cultivate in our lives?
Right. I think it comes down to a question of, will I take responsibility for my life? Like it's my life, and it's a gift that I've been given. From a faith perspective, I believe that God gave us life, and life is a gift that we get to steward. There's a lot we can't control in it, but it has value and it's good, and we need to fundamentally take responsibility for our lives. We can't change what happens to us, but we do have power in how we respond to the complexities of life, and our responses matter. And so I think resiliency is built on a presupposition or an assumption of personal agency, and that personal agency matters. Like what you do, what you think, how you manage your internal world, the way you understand and structure your understanding of reality matters. And so people who are resilient, people who recover, people who come through hard times, there's a quality about how they approach life that matters. And the internal mental set, there's a lot of factors in what leads a person to resiliency. But it's more than just the individual. One study I was looking at about resiliency was talking about the mistake we can make is if all we do is look at just the individual. We have to also look at the community. So group resiliency is this space where we're networking the resources we have to assist people in being resilient. So one image that stays stuck in my mind from Hurricane Katrina over a decade ago was people stuck on a bridge in the Louisiana sun, and it was an overpass, and both sides of the bridge were submerged in water.
Okay.
And people were at the high point of the bridge waiting for rescue. And it's like, that's a pretty traumatic space of helplessness.
Yeah.
And so resiliency was demonstrated by the community, not just by an individual. So you had people with resources, with boats. There was this massive mobilization of people in their fishing boats, and they're out plucking people off the bridges and helping people. And so resiliency is also found within community, not just within the individual. However, what happens within the individual may be the difference between why you have some people succeed and some people don't, or why some people are resilient and some people are not.
Yeah.
But we do always have to keep our finger on the pulse of is the community taking proper responsibility within the chaos.
I would imagine too, resiliency breeds resiliency. Like when you see it in someone else, like it's inspiring, and it calls you to want that for yourself, and want to, to hear stories like that makes me want to think, man, would I do the same? I hope I would. I want to do the same now. Right. Like if I was ever presented with a similar situation, which is an encouraging thing to think about.
Right. That's really insightful, because I felt that watching her TED Talk. It's like, these are helpful points for me to think through when I'm struggling with something.
Yeah.
How am I going to frame up my internal resources? And watching somebody be resilient helps me. It's having someone like you speak into my life and say, hey, Tim, remember these points. If I'm going through a hard time and you say, hey, Tim, remember this, and you show me the way.
Yeah.
I can then follow you. And so that's a powerful part of what I would say what community can give to resiliency. Nobody does well on their own.
Yeah.
Like if we live on an island of our own, resiliency is very, very difficult, if not impossible. And
there's almost an element where it's resiliency requires the community too.
Right. And I think
cool.
in essence, being human, requires community.
Being a healthy human requires community.
Right.
So.
Right. So let's talk about her 3 points.
What's you want to share her first one?
Yeah, I think our first one is that shit happens, and that's not a trivial. It's like we can kind of laugh at that and say, "Yep, sure does," but that's a really deep philosophical and deep concept. Bad things happen, and bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to people who are not particularly moral or good. And so Jesus talks about it when he says it rains on the just and the unjust. So good things come to the just and the unjust. Yeah. But bad things happen to all of us and to everyone. And so she makes this point that we have to come to terms with that these bad things are going to happen, and it's part of life. And if bad things happen to you personally, you're not being discriminated against. I've heard it said, and she mentions this in her talk as well. I've heard pastors talk about this at times as well. Is the question is not so much why me, is like when things are going really well, we could ask the question, why not me? Like how is it that I'm blessed to avoid catastrophe? Yeah. And so we really want to inculcate this sense that when things are happening to me that are brutal or difficult, that the question, we don't want to focus our minds on the question of why me, because that will internally place us at in a disadvantage or at a spot of reduced strength. Maybe you can think about it like a lever. Like if I want to gain leverage over something, I need to position myself at the proper spot. Mm-hmm. And if I don't position myself properly with my crowbar or with my lever, I'm not going to be able to exert the right pressure to bring about movement. I think that this principle of how we talk about, hey, yes, shit happens, life's not discriminating against me, why not me, are positions where we can have put more pressure on the lever of to be resilient. Does that make sense?
Yeah. the having the why me attitude puts you in the wrong spot, but why not me gives you a little bit more of the capacity to leverage the situation leverage the situation. So I think when I think about this, I know people who have this mindset, who when troubles come, they have this mindset and they're able to recognize that just stuff is going to happen in life that's hard and very painful and sometimes traumatic. And they recognize that. And then I have friends and people in my life that it's just not the case. And every time something happens, it is the woe is me. It is the life is miserable and stinks. And it almost feels like you either got this or you don't, this type of mentality. And I'd like to hope that that's not the case. But I guess the question is how do we cultivate an attitude that says, why not me? Like an attitude of life is going to be hard. This is a cliche that most people have probably heard, but life wouldn't be so hard if you didn't expect it to be so easy. But I think that's true growing up in the United States in, relative economic flourishing and peace that we have seen unlike any period of time in history. Like really, we're used to the, and TV and advertising says, have comfort, get fat, enjoy yourself. Like this is the narrative we've been told since we were very little. So, we expect it to be so easy. And then when it's not, it becomes earth shattering. So it's like, how do we, I don't know, detox what American consumerism has tried to, teach us that life is supposed to be? How do we detox that and cultivate more of a perspective that, life is going to be hard?
Right. This is an interesting, phenomena within cultures where there's excess.
Yeah. Because like right now, what we're discussing is uniquely Western, modern, 21st century experience right now. There's many people across the world that this is not their experience.
Right. And like, it's like the mental health crisis in America. It's fascinating that depression, anxiety, etc. are so high within a culture in which we have more. Our basic life needs are met. There are certainly aspects of poverty and people who are struggling to keep food on the table.
Yeah.
Within Western culture.
Sure.
And so I don't want to not mention that clearly occurs. However, in a broader brush way, the kind of poverty we have in America doesn't look the same as the poverty you see in Cambodia.
Right.
Or pick other.
India,
I picked Cambodia because I was there a few years ago, and I'm driving down the road and I'm seeing these shacks that are built on top of sewers and on top of it's like the level of destitute poverty it's shocking. It's like, and we as a general rule don't see that level of poverty in America, although there are places that have a lot of abject poverty. But for most people in the States, they have food, they have their basic needs met. And then in even more affluent communities, you see high levels of anxiety and depression and mental health struggles that you don't see in many other poor areas. I think that a significant part of that is that when you have everything you need, it's more difficult to find purpose in life. And so purpose and meaningfulness are derived when we have really productive work to do. And staying alive is really productive work. And working hard just to make sure you have food to eat. It's like you don't have... So you get up every morning, whether you feel like it or not, and you go out and work because you gotta pay the bills, and that's how you're gonna eat. There is a sense in which I think in broad strokes, we've been given so much and we expect so much, and we think that we're entitled to it and we deserve it. And then when shit happens, we don't know how to cope with it. It's like, that's just it. How could that happen to me? That's not the way it's supposed to be. And it shatters our view of what the world is supposed to do. And so when we are grappling with this principle, I think people who are intrinsically motivated, and what I mean by intrinsic motivation is that this sense of purposefulness, this sense of I have something to contribute to the world. My drive is from an internal location. It's like sometimes you might hear it called self-starters. There's an internal motivation that gets me up and it gets me going. Extrinsically motivated people are like, they need the social pressure, or they need expectations from outside of them to motivate them towards action. So I think a good example of external motivation would be, unless you get up and mow the grass, and you can think about saying this to your adolescent, unless you mow the grass every week, you don't get to have a cell phone.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, am I going to just get up and mow the grass because I'm going to be a active participant in what the family needs? And it's a gift that I have to give to my family and to the world, for me to get up and mow the grass and to be active and get out. It's like, that's the struggle of internal versus external motivation. If I need some sort of external thing to give me meaning and purpose and for doing what I'm going to do, else I don't do it, that's when bad things happen. We're going to have less resources to cope with that.
Yeah.
If I have an internal sense of, man, I want to contribute to the world, I have gifts and talents, I'm bringing myself to bear, I have these interests, I have these passions, now I'm going to go do it. That we will respond differently to crisis depending on those two things.
Yeah. How do you cultivate that? Like, growing intrinsic motivation? Is that, like, I'd like to hope that it's not just you are intrinsically motivated or you're not, because that seems way better than just being externally motivated. But if I'm being honest, I'm like, ooh, I think I'm probably much more externally motivated than internally motivated most days. And that's what, like, listening to her story, thinking about, losing a child. Oh, it makes my stomach sick to think about that. And I'm like, I don't know how I would come back from something like that. Like, we, when our son was born, he was in the hospital for a couple of days, ended up not being a big deal, but one of the most scary couple days of my life, like, hands down. And to think of, and it ended up being fine, but to think of if a situation hadn't been fine or something happens in the future, I'm like, man, I don't know how I'd respond. All
right. Well, I think that intrinsic motivation doesn't take away the pain
Sure.
of those difficult realities. Like, we struggle for and towards a resiliency. And in many regards, we need to be reminded, and we need to be told that you can do it. There's more to you than you know. Don't take the seat of being a victim. You have agency. You have the ability to respond. You're still here. Life matters. And so when we are in that place of we are knocked flat, we lean into other people, and we listen to the messages that we're being told. And so we can foster this sense of, this is something that I think is valuable, and it's a belief that's going to help me. And I'm not going to allow myself to dwell on this idea of I must really not be a good person, or I am a failure, or I'm going to amount to nothing. And the self-defeating mindset, I'm going to foster I'm not being discriminated against. This isn't, I'm not going to organize my thinking around this. I'm going to organize my thinking around movement forward. I'm still here, and I have purpose and meaning in life. And yes, something bad really happened to me, and I'm struggling. And there's going to be days where I'm flat on my back, where I'm flat on my face. But that's not the end of me. I'm going to get back up. Proverbs, I think it's Proverbs that talks about that the righteous man falls 7 times, he yet rises again. And it's like, there's this element of, we get back up. If we get knocked down, we get back up. If we get knocked down, we get back up. And so we're going to, if we want to be intrinsically motivated, if we want that internal space, we continually turn our mind towards ways of thinking that facilitate it, that move us in a direction, versus, and we know we know this when we're when we feel this sense of despair, if you look at your thinking during those times, and you'd write down all your thoughts, you're going to find out how abysmal they really are. Like, they're really, really, it's a really sick way of thinking. It's like turning your mind towards those ways of thinking profoundly impacts your motivation. And so we want to find healthy and good. I'm not talking about self-deceiving. I'm not talking about that pie in the sky, no bad things happen. It's just like, we take, it's like crap happens. It really hurts, but it's not the end of me. And I'm going to get back up, and I'm going to keep pressing on. And so we lean into the resources that are offered us, the support that we have, and we move through. This leads into her second point of choose carefully where you place your attention. And this comes back to that element of recognizing and understanding our thinking and our behavior. Like, we can think in terms of, okay, how do we act and where's our mindset? And we want to act and put our actions towards the thing that needs our attention. We also want to put our thinking there. And so we have to choose that carefully. And that's where I would say the people who support us in our life, our coaches, our counselors, our pastors, our friends, choose carefully who you listen to. Like, who represents the kind of person you want to be, who's going to help you go the distance. And resilient people tune into the good. They choose carefully what they look at, what they watch, what they see, who they listen to, and that's an important second step.
And I think that's important to also, with this one, recognize that what is good may not be the easiest thing to hear, or it may not be because I could see easily just using this as a justification for, well, I'm just going to allow in all the voices that make me feel better, or make me feel better for a moment, rather than help me actually work through the deepest and most challenging parts of whatever situation I'm experiencing.
Right. Like it's a bag of chips.
Yeah,
would really help me.
Yes.
Sit down and I'll drink a beer and watch hockey and eat an ice cream.
Right.
That would make me feel better.
Right.
And it's like,
right.
Yeah, for a short time, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and then that leads into like her third one. The third question there, or like the third point she makes, is this helping me or hurting me? Right. That I feel like that's in an honest reflection of that question helps you filter whether or not like this is actually where I should be placing my attention.
Yeah, it was really moving to hear her talk about evaluating whether she's just sitting and looking at photographs of her daughter and her memories, and asking herself that question of, is this helping me or is this hurting me?
Yeah.
And I think like, wow, what a powerful intervention. It doesn't mean, I'm guessing to this day, she probably will still at times allow herself to remember and enjoy the memories of her daughter. Of course she does. Like any healthy person is going to have a powerful way of remembering what's meaningful and good. I think what she was pressing against is that there are pathological ways of remembering. There are unhealthy ways of remembering, and for her, sitting in the middle of her grief and endlessly just paging through her photo albums was not allowing her to move forward. And she made this powerful statement that really impacted me when she said, "Don't lose what you have to what you have lost." And so I'll say that again. Don't lose what you have to what you have lost. And so if she just spends all of her time looking at photographs and living in that space, the time that she has today, the ability to connect with her other children, her purpose in life of writing and research, and like all the things that she has to give back to her community and to life are getting lost if all she does is just focus on what she doesn't have anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's hard. Like, how do we do that? Like, that takes a great deal of courage and discipline and accountability and being willing to really challenge ourselves in how we organize ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think that one of the most tangible, practical things listening to her TED Talk that she suggests is practicing gratitude and actually listing out 3 things every day that you are thankful for, or that was a good thing that happened in your day. And to do that consistently will really start to change your perspective on your life and what is going on. And I think helps cultivate, don't lose what you have to what you have lost. Right. If you're constantly remembering and recognizing the good that you do still have, it will help combat a bit against the despair of what is really painful or really hard in life at the moment right now.
Right. I was reading a book called Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff, and she reflects on there of a formula that goes this way: pain times resistance equals suffering. And the idea is that we have to accept what's painful. And so resilient people accept the reality of pain in their world. We have to validate it. We have to lament it. We have to cry. We have to express honestly what hurts. When we resist our pain, that increases our suffering, because we're fighting against that which isn't going away. It's like it's with us. So the grief, unhealthy forms of expression of griefers, when we're trying to bargain with what has occurred, as though somehow our bargaining can change it. And so internally sometimes it's called denial. It's this sense that we just won't accept that this occurred. And certainly there's an element of that denial that seems to be part of it's part of the healing process, in the sense of, like, I just can't believe that happened. Like, there's no way that can be true. And we have to, it's not like that itself is a problem in our grief. It's like, that's a natural, normal experience of shock and grief and loss. But at some point, if we continue that resisting the reality of something, it just makes us suffer more. And so we radically accept that life is broken. Life does serve up some really, really painful stuff, and we don't resist it. And so we can evaluate if something's helping or hurting based on, is this increasing my suffering, or is it helping me?
Right.
I also like the serenity prayer as I think about resiliency. Sure. Like people in the addiction world often talk about the serenity prayer in their recovery groups. It's a prayer of resilience for all of us, whether we're grappling with addiction or not. And you can think about it as like 3 circles. The inner circle is a space of what I'm able to control, and the outer circle is what I can't control. And the serenity prayer says, God, give me the peace or the serenity to accept what I cannot change. So the things that are happening in the outer circle, I can't change those things. And I need the grace and the peace from God to accept those things. The The inner circle is where we focus. What do I have? What am I able to address? And this might go back to your question about how we develop intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. It's like we want to foster what we have control of. We want to lean into that space and make that our place of focus. And then we ask God for the wisdom to know the difference between the two. And so if you think about the line of the inner circle, separating it from the outer circle, that line is wisdom. It's a boundary line. And so we set a boundary for ourselves through wisdom that says, no, I'm not going to try to be changing that which I cannot change. I am going to keep my focus on that inner circle. In many ways, that goes back like her second point of where we place our attention. It's like, I'm going to place my attention in the middle of that circle because I want to only focus there. And the good news is that as we attend to what we are able to control, that circle will grow. It's like we will have more influence in our lives. And our resiliency will grow, and our ability to thrive will grow, and we will add resources to our life. And so we grow more robust. That inner circle continues to expand, and we have more agency. And so it's like if I am physically overweight and weak, which I was before I started CrossFit, and I'm still in the process of correcting this problem. There are aspects of my health that I don't have any direct control over. But what I do have control over is what I eat, and I do have control over what I do. So I can do what I can do, which means I walk into CrossFit and I check my ego at the door.
Yeah.
And say, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to do the maximum possible. And I will let the people there press me beyond. Like I will let them encourage me and challenge me. And so I think about that encouragement is a mixture of support and challenge.
Sure.
And so I go to CrossFit and they challenge me and they support me. And so I can be there just trying. I'm doing like the most basic of exercises. And there are people there that are phenomenal athletes, American Ninja Warrior like people who are doing like insane amounts of, like I look at them like there's no way I could ever, like I can't even envision myself there, but I don't need to, because that's not what I can. If I focus there,
you're right,
I will be disheartened. And the reality is I do what I can do. And the coach comes past once in a while and says, "Good job, Tim. Keep it up. You're doing great." And I'm like, "Am I really doing great?" No. Look down that's great down there. What they're doing,
right.
I'm not doing like. But now as soon as I do that, I'm outside of my circle of control.
Sure.
And wisdom says, "Tim, don't you dare step out of that circle." And so I continually press myself to say, no, check your ego at the door. You can do it. Just do what you can do, and maybe just a little bit beyond. Like allow people to press you, and there's more to you than you know.
Yeah.
And so if we limit ourselves to what we know and what we think we know, we'll stay truncated.
Yeah.
If we let people press us and say, no, there's a lot more to you than you know. And my coaches do that at CrossFit. It's like this is a 25-minute workout, and you work hard the whole time. Like you work as hard as you can, as long as you can. And if you absolutely can't, that's fine. But I find that every single time I go there, I accomplish more and do more than what I would say I'd be able to do.
Yeah.
And so that's wisdom. Wisdom is expanding that inner circle. Within 3 months, I lost 5 pounds of fat and gained 3 pounds of muscle. Guess what? My area of control grew. I now am capable, and I have more control than I did previously. And that we can think of that as metaphorical for many aspects of life. As we focus on what we can control, our resiliency will grow, our sense of self will grow, and we will be able to expand and press the boundaries out of what I would say when I use control in a healthy way. Like there are controlling people where it's not healthy, but controlling that which we can control is a healthy expression of our agency. And so that's how I think is a good way to think about fostering and developing resiliency. And I think Dr. Hone said it well. When shit happens, it's a part of life. The second is choose carefully where you put your attention. And third, evaluate yourself. Like, is this helping or hurting me? And if it's hurting, stop it. Don't keep doing that. Find a better way. Commit yourself to these 3 steps, and you will build your resiliency.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I feel like maybe we should make a comment particular to the hardships that we experience in life, that it often isn't fair. Like, it's not fair. And what we're talking about is, everyone experiences hardships, but there is a reality that some people will experience more than others. And I keep thinking about the idea, like, we're using the word that, life doesn't discriminate, in the sense that everyone experiences like tragedies, like a hurricane impacts everyone in the community. But there is a reality that, like, the poorer communities in that city are going to be impacted greater. Mm-hmm. And so there is this, I feel like this probably is even harder to hear if you genuinely are discriminated against in life, mm-hmm. to where it's like, it's not the same. But when we're talking about this, like, this is we're speaking generally to the painful experiences that happen in life to all people anywhere in the globe at all times. It looks different depending upon your context, but everyone can relate to that to an extent.
Well, and I think, like, that's so true, but the principles still hold. It's like,
right.
It's like there's the world is full of injustice.
Right.
And the question becomes, like, how will I navigate injustice?
Right.
And will I take a resilient approach to the injustices that I face, or will I not?
Right.
And so you start to go to the poorest of communities, and these principles still will benefit the individuals within that space. And so what we don't do is if we're in those spaces, we very purposefully do not look at others and make our assessments about self based on people who have a different set of circumstances. So economically, there are people in the world who are radically wealthier than I, have resources that I don't have. And John Maxwell, in one of his leadership books, talks about wealth and says that wealth gives options. And he's right. Wealth does give options. However, there's an element that if I only focus on the options I would have if I had more, I will be like self-limiting because I'm outside of that inner circle.
Yeah.
It's like, and so regardless of where we are on continuums of justice or injustice, or regardless of where we're at in that space, that principle of how I organize what is within my control and focusing there, we can grow that internal set of resources. That doesn't mean that we ought not look at areas of injustice and say, how can we help people who are suffering in ways that we're not suffering? In fact, I think that's a space of moral obligation that, especially for people of faith, but I'd say even beyond just people of faith, like what I would say being a good human means we are going to take up the cause of the poor. We're going to be honest about injustices in the world and how we can participate in helping people who are suffering. But the principles themselves, I think, hold regardless of our station in life, in the whole of society.
That's great.
So, let's bring this down to like practical. How will this impact you today? How will this impact me today? Like if we're going to apply these principles, what are ways that you might apply them personally in the today and the tomorrow, like in your immediate life? Where does this connect with you?
Yeah, the practice of gratitude, and specifically the question, is this helping me or hurting me? Because I think everyone knows the answer to that question pretty quickly, to regardless, or like whatever the action or behavior it is that you are partaking in. It's just a matter of whether or not you choose to do the action that helps you. But to keep in mind that, there are consequences to each of those actions. Like this will help me or this will hurt me. Mm-hmm. Do I really want to further deepen the hurt, or do I want to actually become healthier and get help? Mm-hmm. Like, do I actually need like one more beer right now? Like, do I actually need to watch one more, episode of whatever on Netflix or YouTube or whatever? Like, very quickly, I think you can recognize this isn't helpful. That question, like, I want that question to just kind of be there on the forefront of my brain, always kind of nagging, like, hey, Sam, is this helpful or is this hurtful? Think about it. Like, and then I think I want some sort of practice of gratitude more a part of my life, because I think that helps. It helps wrestle with the painful experiences that just come with living, and it helps you not get stuck in a like loathsome attitude. So,
I think for me, I want to, I think I want to let that second principle really reverberate with me, is that like I want to where I place my attention, and how I think about what's going on. I have a tendency to, at least in my mind, move outside of my areas of control, and so I want to cognitively and emotionally be in that center circle of what is it that I have agency in, what do I have control over, rather than fantasizing about ways I might have control, and then let my mind run with ways in which what I could do if I had, and then kind of create an internal world of this is what could be if only, but then I'm stuck in, well, I can't implement it. If I think in terms of, if I had X amount of resources, then I could do X. Well, I don't have those resources, so why would I spend my cognitive energy fantasizing about that? How about I stay in do what I can do with what I do have, nurture, cultivate, and grow my skill set, my ways of thinking. And so I think like what really challenged me in her work, if I want to be a resilient person, it's going to be what I do with my thinking, and staying in that place of putting my attention at places that are healthy and good.
Yeah. Great.
I didn't do a very good job last night when your question, and when you were talking about doing something helping or hurting, I was watching hockey, and my son and I were watching Batman, and I was like, I want a popsicle. And I thought about it. I was like, Tim, that is not on the list of splurges today for your diet, for the way, what you want to accomplish in your physical health. That fudge popsicle is not on the list of right now. And I, in essence, said, damn it, I'm going to eat the popsicle. And so I got it out.
You
and
ignored it anyway.
I ignored it.
Yeah,
I was just like, I was like, that's not what I want to do. And so we have to, like, it's important for us not to beat ourselves up in that space. At the same time, I have to be honest with myself and say, where am I going to put my attention towards the things that really matter to me, and let my behavior, let that be a grid for my behavioral choices. Tough work, especially when our appetites are involved. But that's an area where I really want to spend more focus on growth and developing a healthy, resilient life. I want to be physically resilient in my health. I want to maximize the potential of my body. Like, I want my body to be healthy, because when my body's healthy, my mind, my thinking, like, many things are built off that foundation of strength. And so that's my personal challenge in this conversation.
Yeah. Well, and I think these three things in particular, like really map well with a Christian worldview, like under even the first one, grappling with why is there such pain in this world and suffering and genuine evil, and to come to a place where you have accepted that as the reality of life. Man, the Bible has a lot to say about that and why there's sin and brokenness. But, leading into 2 and 3, a Christian worldview gives you the strength to actually walk through it. Right. When you understand, even think about choosing where you place your attention is, you could just focus on all of the bad and the evil. Or if you're intentional about recognizing that a good, powerful God entered a broken world to experience the pain and brokenness himself in Jesus, right? Now you have, that's a much different framework that you're working with when that's the God that you are supposed to reflect on and meditate on his word daily. That's a much different thing. And is it helping me or hurting me? Right. The conviction that he gives us his own Spirit to prompt us in that very question. So I don't know. This is a cool one to think about. Yeah. And I think that if anyone's got a chance at becoming a resilient person, to me, a Christian is the top candidate for being someone who really could be that type of person. Right.
Certainly Christian theology and the structures of our faith offer resiliency to people.
Yeah.
It's like,
and you find this in history too. Some of the most inspiring life stories are those of Christians who their faith have pressed them to places and to accomplish things that are just holy smokes. How could anyone have done that?
Right.
And,
Right.
So
and it takes me back to what you said is your kind of takeaway is it's a reminder of what Paul writes in Thessalonians when he says, "In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ concerning you." Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I look at the social science literature and it's like, oh, right. It's there. Yeah. There's the principle. The principle of gratitude is an age-old, ancient, ancient instruction that comes out of many different religious structures. Include this is a fundamental building block of successful, resilient living. Is be grateful. Don't be resentful. The opposite of gratitude is resentment. It's I resent what life has served up to me, and it's so resentment yields to gratitude. And that's what makes gratitude hard, is because it forces us to give up our malice and our bitterness and our resentment to what has been dished out to us. And that's makes it really challenging. But you're right. Our faith gives a great structure for being a resilient person. And I want to live that in every dimension of my life as I'm able. Well, great conversation, Sam. That was, I find it personally challenging and useful, and I hope our listeners do as well. We'll put in the show notes a link to Dr. Hohn's TED Talk, and I hope that you find that meaningful as well. So thanks for this conversation. It was fun.
Thank you, Tim. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Guideposts with Dr. Tim Stauffer. If you're finding this podcast beneficial, please share it with a friend or leave us a review. Also, make sure to check out the show notes where you can find links to resources as well as an email address. We want to hear from you. Send us your questions, feedback, and topic ideas for future episodes. Thanks for listening.